Hello, my loves, and welcome back to the Fluffenhammer adjacent. Continuing on with our Why series. Why this, why that, why Chaos Space Marines, why Death Guard. I'm going to go for the Thousand Sons today, the original sons of Magnus. The Thousand Sons are right up there with the Death Guard and the Emperor's Children and the Word Bearers for me. I love, love, love these guys. Easily one of my favorite Chaos Legions. Gun to head, I wouldn't be able to discern between those top three, the Death Guard, Emperor's Children, and Thousand Sons. I think they are wonderful, absolutely wonderful in terms of their ethos, their background. The Thousand Sons are by a country mile one of the most interesting. They have one of the best histories and backgrounds, for my peculiar tastes, in Warhammer 40,000. And certainly amongst the Space Marine legions, theirs is obviously it's an ode of tragedy. It's a mythic parable of absolute tragedy. It has changed. It's changed quite a lot since its original inception, but some of the core elements remain the same. So there's always the Council of Nicaea, although it wasn't named as such. Basically, in the original fluff, it just says that they were censored for their use of sorcery by the Emperor. And that's what caused Magnus to sort of go off the deep end and descend into despair and all that gubbins. There's always the attack on Prospero by the Space Wolves, although the details have changed. In the original fluff, there's no saying that the Emperor did not fully intend for the Space Wolves to desolate Prospero. That's what they were ordered to do. That's what they did. In the new fluff, it's a little bit more ambiguous. It seems that Horus kind of manipulated the Space Wolves before anyone knew that Horus was a traitor into destroying Prospero. It's also become much more detailed and interesting. So there were no like custodies, for example, or Sisters of Silence in the original fluff because they basically didn't exist back then. That is a much more recent development. The nature of Prospero itself was very, very vague back then, back in the day. There was really nothing on it until the Index Astartes article on the original Index Astartes article in third ed. And then it was developed obviously in the Horus Heresy books. You've got entire books set on Prospero back then. And that only made it more tragic. That only made it more tragic because Prospero is effectively it's an analog for certain real world historical events and also myths. It's an Atlantis myth in its own peculiar way. It's Constantinople. It's the Library of Alexandria. Basically, it's the tragedy of human stupidity. It's an example of how war and conflict destroys things of beauty and worth. Prospero is one of the most developed, the most enlightened, the most ascended cultures in the Imperium. The Thousand Sons are unusual in this as well because they're one of the more human legions in the sense that they are encouraged to operate on a human level. They're not just warriors. They're not just like Ubermensch separated from the common herd of humanity. On Prospero, they would be seen regularly just mingling with the hoi polloi and just doing stuff. They did things like kept vineyards and presided over schools and colleges, and they practiced arts and crafts in a very similar vein to the Emperor's Children, actually. There's a lot of overlap between the Emperor's Children and the Thousand Sons, a lot of overlap. They just happen to emphasize those qualities in slightly different ways. I imagine there isn't really any official fluff on it, but I imagine Fulgrim and Magnus would have gotten on pretty well were it not for, Fulgrim's narcissism. Um, but that fact, and the fact that there was nothing that could be done. There was no preparation against the Space Wolves falling on Prospero meant that all of that was destroyed. This ascended culture was wiped out. The peoples of Prospero, who were probably the most enlightened and content in all of the Imperium. It's almost utopian the way Prospero is drawn. It was destroyed. It was utterly, utterly destroyed, apart from Tisca, the capital city. And that was only saved because, Magnus and the Thousand Sons wrenched it across time and space into the warp, into Sortiarius, where it sits now. even to this day. It's not in the warp anymore, but it's still on Sortiarius, and it's a very, very different city these days. But the ethos of the Thousand Sons really appeals to me. They were very different from all of the other Space Marine legions. They did not consider themselves instruments of war or tools or weapons primarily. They regarded the project of the Great Crusade in a very different way. What they wanted to do was not just bring humanity back into the fold, not just unite humanity under the banner of the Imperium. They wanted to transcend humanity. Their entire ethos pre-heresy was humanity is inadequate. It needs to transcend itself. That surely that's the point. Surely that's the point. If we are getting this situation where humanity is connecting to the warp and there are more psychers and there are more sorcerers, then the point of it is to harness that part of ourselves and to use it to move humanity into another condition. Magnus's agenda was utopian, even arguably even more so than the Emperor's was. I mean, the Emperor's is dark utopianism in the sense that it's a highly exclusivist, highly expansionist and genocidal utopianism, which the Thousand Sons took part in, but reluctantly. This is another element of the Thousand Sons I really fucking love. When they encountered cultures, they did everything in their power not to take them to war, not to fall on them with force. They were diplomats, they were philosophers, they spoke to them, they tried to bring them in with examples of how wonderful the Imperium could be and how being part of it could help them rather than hinder them, you know? Very different from a lot of the other legions, and very different from the Great Crusade as a whole. They are they are almost like the kind face, the kinder face of the expansionist regime. Still an expansionist regime, and yeah, they were still genocidal bastards who were involved in hideous, hideous pogroms and the destructions of entire worlds and whatnot. But at least they fucking tried. At the very least, they were trying. And as a result, they were constantly clashing with the rest of the Imperium because they were scholars, because they were enlightened, because they saw the loss of culture as exactly that, a loss, not as something that was necessary or as something that's even worth celebrating. And I really love them for that. I really love them for that. And the fact that their whole ethos as well, the fact that they are wizards and scholars and occultists and sorcerers, love that. Love that to bits. How could I not go for that? I've always had a thing for occultism and wizards and sorcerers and that kind of thing. The aesthetics of that appeals to me beautifully, as does the poetry of it. It appeals to me so, so much and has done ever since I was a young child. So the Thousand Sons obviously are something that I've been attracted to. It helps that they have one of the best characters in the entirety of 40k, which is Ahriman. Ahriman is easily the most human and humane of a fairly human and humane legion. Even up to this day, okay, he is now lost and he is tied up in this elaborate web of manipulations and agendas and intrigues where it's very difficult to tell what he's doing, why he's doing it, who's influencing him, how far he is being influenced and manipulated by Zeech and by Zeech's demons, to what degree his arrogance blinds him to that fact. That is fascinating. Like his father, Ahriman is a utopian at heart. He still believes it, unlike Magnus, who's completely surrendered at this point. Ahriman still believes that there is some hope, not only for his legion, but for humanity. Like Fabius Bile, he believes that the warp can be harnessed, that the gods can either be tamed or changed or diluted for the betterment and indeed the transcendence of humanity. He still believes that after 10,000 years, and everything he does is with an eye towards that particular agenda. And unfortunately, he also believes that the ends justify the means. And as a result, yeah, he engages in absolute frigging horrors. It's very difficult to tell exactly what he's doing half the time because everything he does is a manipulation. He is moving everyone and everything around him with regards to very particular agendas and doesn't particularly care about them as individuals. He wants transcendence, not for himself. That's another interesting thing. He is not a megalomaniac. He's not power hungry. He doesn't even have the ego that Fabius Bile does. He fully intends, as John French's novels point out, he fully intends to die in the realization of this dream. He doesn't care if that's the case. He's willing to sacrifice himself to bring it about. That's made plain in the third book, which I believe is Ahriman. I can't remember what that one is. Ahriman Exalted? I can't remember. But it's the one where he returns to Prospero and is absolutely willing to sacrifice himself to restore his brothers. Also, the stuff that he does with the best of intentions that ends up doing the very worst thing. I mean, he destroyed his entire legion with the best of intentions. He reduced them to the rubricae with the rubric of Ahriman, intending to save them and suspend them for all time in unchanging purity. He reduced them to unchanging unlife, to ghosts within their armor. And that's brilliant too. I mean, that's another wonderful element of the Thousand Sons, the rubricae, the tragedy of that. This legion that was dedicated to academia and learning and self betterment has become a legion of ghosts and maniacs. And that is the great tragedy of them. I think they're absolutely beautiful. In the present day of the Warhammer 40,000 universe, the way they operate is so far beyond any of the other Chaos Space Marine legions. They are basically another principle. They are unlike anything. They don't operate, for example, within temporal restrictions because of their nature, because of their expanded suite of senses, and the fact that they connect to the warp and they experience reality in a completely different way. Things like cause and effect and time don't really mean anything to them. There are suggestions in the more recent background that there are accounts of present day Thousand Sons occurring in the Horus Heresy, or even before that. Time doesn't mean anything to them. It's all like a manipulation of probability. Reality is a movable feast for them, and either a work of art to change and reconfigure, or a puzzle to unlock. That is fucking brilliant. I love that so, so much. Aesthetically, they're wonderful too. I mean, you've got the whole sort of pseudo Egyptian thing, which is beautiful, but also all the occult iconography, the mutations of Zeech, all of that appeals to me so, so much. The Exalted I mean, the model line is glorious at the moment. It could do with expanding, that's for damn sure. I mean, it's not as expansive as the Death God. I'm sincerely hoping, because they're going to be one of the last codices for 10th, it looks like. I'm hoping that's what they're working on, giving them some of their own bespoke demon engines like the Death Guard, expanding the range of their troop units and whatnot. Maybe some Thousand Sun sorcerers on discs or something like that as a fast attack option. I love that so much. I love the model range. The ones that do exist are beautiful. The Rubrique set is one of the best, one of my favorites in all of 40k. The Scarab Occult Terminators, woof. Woof. So beautiful. In fact, I think my favorite in all of the range has to be. I mean, I love Magnus too. Magnus is amazing. But for me, it's got to be those Exalted Sorcerers, that set of 3 Exalted Sorcerers you can get. That set is amazing. It's absolutely amazing. You can make so much from them. In terms of hobby, I find them to be very similar to the Death Guard in the sense that you can do all sorts to them. You don't just have to assemble the rubricae as they are, sort of uniform in lockstep. You can do things like bore holes in them and have like sorcerous energy escaping, or use the Night Gaunt models from AOS and have souls escaping from the ruptured armor or stuff like that. My own Thousand Sons, they are very, very unusual indeed. They are ghosts. I've painted them up so that they're not even like the normal rubricae, they're ghosts. And the whole thing with them is that the rubric has fractured them on the level of probability. So they are like these fluctuating potentials. So I've modeled them so they have all sorts of weird bits and pieces coming off of them, and like mutations and spectral mutations as opposed to physical ones. And that's loads of fun. You can do anything with these guys. And it's even more true for the sorcerers. The sorcerers are some of the most mutated Chaos Space Marines out there because they serve Zeech, and Zeech is the master of mutation, wearing their changes as badges of honor or pride is a common thing amongst the Thousand Sons, and each one of them is idiosyncratic. No two of them are the same. So you can go to town on these guys. The imagination is the limit here. Imagination is the limit with them. And then, of course, you've got the big granddaddy. You've got Magnus the Red, the first of the Primarchs to come out in 40k, the first to return. And he is wonderful. I mean, the model is wonderful, but as a character, he's wonderful. In his demonic form, you never know what you're going to get because in the background, that model that we've got, by the way, is not what he is. That's just one of his aspects. That's just what he's like in that particular frame in time. And from that perspective, when he's encountered in the background in the fluff, he's just this giant flux. People see and perceive different things depending on what preconceptions they have of him, what angle they approach him from, what agendas they approach him with. He is in endless flux. And that's true of his character as well. That's true. You may get like the bellicose, bitter, warmongering Magnus. You might get the Crimson King, the sage. You might get the sorcerer Magnus. You can get that's the wonderful thing. You can do almost anything you like with Magnus the Red. He is in flux too. So you can go to town on that miniature if you want to and present a different version of him. Wonderful stuff. I love that so much. I mean, for my shattered sons, as I call them, that's the name of the warband. What I've done with him, I've just because they've got eyes modeled on them. I've like modeled demonic eyes on them that are sort of shifting and changing all over them. That's what I've done with him. On his wings, he's got eyes. On his body, he's got eyes, and it's kind of fun. It's kind of fun to create that kind of motif for them. In terms of play, they're kind of new, the Thousand Sons. I mean, they were introduced as a coherent force at the end of Seventh Ed. You could make Thousand Sons armies before then, but they were always hodgepodge and very difficult to play. They were never really coherent as a force, let's be honest, when they were part of the main Chaos Space Marine force. Now, they're one of the most strange and unusual and interesting forces in the game. Since the advent of 10th, they've been doing great guns. Their index is amazing. Their special rule is great. Their flexibility is wonderful. It really is fascinating. You can do so much with these guys, and they are loads of fun to play. I've had a few games with them in 10th, and they are so much more fluid than they were in ninth. The problem with them in ninth, although they were interesting, is that they became an exercise in cataloging. You had to remember what spells each sorcerer had and what upgrades they had, and all of that stuff. Who'd cast what in any one given? It was a pain in the arse, basically. When the psychic phase rolled around, your opponent may as well have gone away and made a cup of coffee because that's how long it would have taken to sort it out. Now, because it's all been refined down, it's so much better. Oh my god, it's so much better. They're maneuverable. Oh my god, are they maneuverable? For an army of foot slogging, very awkward animated suits of armor, they're really flexible and maneuverable because of all the spells they can use and bits of war gear and stratagems to reposition themselves and to take themselves off the battlefield and appear somewhere else. So maneuverable. And by the way, one of the Death Star units in 40k at the moment, I've taken this and it slaps. Ahriman, a squad of 10 Rubricae, all with warp flamers. Jesus. Unbelievable. They can hose things like entire units off the battlefield, and they can have a good go at like big war engines and monsters as well. Unbelievable unit, absolutely unbelievable unit. Um, yeah, the Thousand Sons, they are by far one of my favorites. By far one of my favorites. And my enthusiasm for them boils over. Every single time something new occurs, I just can't get over how much fun they are. And I'm sincerely hoping when they roll around again, a lot of time is taken to expand the miniatures range a little bit. I mean, we've got a lot of stuff from AOS as well, which is nice. Some of the Zeech stuff from AOS has been ported over, which I kind of like, I'll be honest. I would like to see a unit of cultists that's more unique to the Thousand Sons. The Thousand Sons cultists are really good at the moment, but they're just cultists with a special rule. What would be wonderful is to see the cabal, the sorcerers, the covens and cabals of sorcerers, of mortal sorcerers that we know exist on Sorciarius, taking to the field with them. So a psychic unit, that has inbuilt psychic powers. That would be wonderful. Thrall wizards, they used to call them way back in the day. That would be great because we know the Thousand Sons go to war with these guys in tow. That would be fantastic. The Zangor units are wonderful. I love the Zangor. Another killer unit, by the way, in 10th Ed. One that you never would have taken in 9th Ed because they were shit. But now, the Zangor Enlightened on discs, woof. With the bows, bloody hell. They're so good for taking objectives and for sniping characters. They're so, so good at it. They are almost an auto include. They're that good. The Mutalith Vortex Beast. Oh, more of that. More big, gribbly mutated monsters in the Thousand Suns, please. There must be all sorts of nonsense wandering around Sorciarius, the planet that they currently inhabit. Because Sorciarius is this ever changing nightmarescape. It's like a surrealist nightmarescape that you can't even perceive correctly, let alone operate on. And it's full of monsters. So let's bring some of them, yeah? Let's bring some of the really nasty monsters with the Thousand Suns. I love them. Love them to bits. One of my absolute favorites. And I cannot wait for their codex to come out in 10th Ed. I really, really can't.